Accessing agent files. Brian Sovryn. Early 21st century anarchist. Creator and host of the podcast Sovryn Tech. By the year 2021, the show would be instrumental in the downfall of various conservative ideologies in the government, helping usher in an incredible time.
Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild ride. You're listening to Sovryn Tech. Tired of boring specials about history, science, and technology? Then get on your best headphones, because you might want to lay down for this. A Sovryn Tech special with the world's foremost anarchist technophile, Brian Sovryn. He has a huge, well, you know. And now, here's Brian.
Oh, yes! The Golden Stallion! The baddest boy on the blockchain, here with you for a Sovryn Tech special. I told you they'd be coming, and here they come. I've actually got a couple more lined up for you. This one's just going to be a fun top 8. I wanted to get it out there while I had some, honestly, some spare time. And people are actually, they really like these top 8s that I do. And, maybe they're not necessarily the most important work that I ever get out there, but I enjoy them. I think they're a good time. But I've got a couple other ones that are actually important coming out. I think I will be having a release of one about MadeSafe. With a made safe evangelist. And then I also have, of course, the proof, the blockchain proof special, where we go over proof of work, proof of stake, all kinds of different proofs that we will discuss in that. So those are coming. Don't worry. But I want to go ahead and get this one out because I actually want to talk about it with what this is. This is a top 8 video games of the 90s. Now, these will not be, I think a top 8 list would be kind of commonplace, where you would talk about Sonic the Hedgehog and, Super Mario 64 and Cruisin' USA and whatever. But I was like, no, let's, and obviously Final Fantasy 7 and 8. I mean, 8 was amazing. One of my favorites. But forget it. Let's do ones that maybe people never thought about that were actually great games. And honestly, the 8 that I chose really are some of the best games I've ever played. And this is just for the 90s. So this is from 91 to 2001 or to 2000. Because that's, how actual decades work, right? Or I guess maybe that's how centuries work. But anyway, so I wanted to do this because I wanted to do it in conjunction with the fact that I have actually started a bit of a business venture. Only one employee, and it's me. At least only one employee at the moment. And it's called Zomia Offline Games. And there is already there's already a URL. I haven't put a website up yet. That's how fresh this really is. But I am creating an RPG, and it is an old school RPG like you would see in the 90s, one of which we're going to talk about in this special. And it's going to be a game. My intention for it anyway, it'll be a series, of course. What great RPG isn't a series, right? Except for maybe Mario and the Seven Stars. And it's going to be a very anarchist themed game. And obviously it's going to be a very sexy game as well. There's going to be plenty of that in there, even though it's going to be done with sprites all the same. And so I wanted to announce it here. That is something that is going to be taking quite a bit of my time, along with my duties for Free Talk Live, and of course, my responsibilities to you, the listeners, that I so much enjoy. And, I gotta say, you guys I've gotten some very kind donations recently. In fact, someone keeps buying me gift cards, Amazon gift cards. I can't tell you enough how much those mean to me. And they're not small, they're substantial. And I really appreciate, I mean, if that's another way you want to donate to the show, please, by all means. There is an Amazon link at sovryntech.com, but don't hesitate to do that as well. It helped out a lot. a whole lot. And also another listener actually donated, or should I say gifted, a couple of games to me on Steam, and great games at that. So the Chaos Engine, Speedball 2 HD, I mean, as well as a helicopter game, just fantastic. And actually, I really enjoy helicopter games. I don't know if I've talked about it yet on Sovereign Tech in the past, but I have a deep passion for Airwolf. So I'm ready to hop in a helicopter at any time. So thank you all so much for that. There is also a very special listener that is donating regularly to each episode with Bitcoin. And in fact, he's donating 0.00069, I believe is the accurate amount. And 69, it doesn't get any better than that. So I really appreciate all of you doing that. And so here's a little bonus content for you. It's just fun, you know, but honestly, with me, you never know what I'm going to say, right? I mean, stuff just like comes out of nowhere. At least that's what I hear from people, is that just the offhand comments that get made are often the most interesting. So even in a special that seems so, you know, perhaps banal, or banal, as I like to say, as, you know, 90s video games, maybe there's something interesting there. So, you know, give it a listen if you want to. Let's go ahead. Let's get right into it. So yes. Oh, by the way, with the game does not have a title yet, but the first game from Zomia Offline Games will be, I'm planning on it being out for Saturnalia, or Christmas of 2014. I am going to be developing I'm going to try and develop really fast to get it out there. So, but I will let you know. Maybe it'll end up being a little bit later than that. March is always a good time to release big games, and maybe we'll do that for March 2015. But we'll see. So let's do this. let's get into it. Again, this is a list of games that you know, probably maybe you haven't played. Some of them, good luck trying to get to play them now, unless, you know, you want to actually like go on eBay or something and buy the game. Or you can go on Amazon, and of course you can use the affiliate link at sovereigntech.com on the left side of the page to do that. But, you know, again, it's just not run-of-the-mill ones, and I'll mention when it's something you can grab on Steam. I'll let you know. So let's open it up with, I guess we'll open it up with the oldest of the bunch. And this is maybe fitting because in just actually the day that this gets released will also be the release of Michael Bay's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't know. I don't know how that movie's going to be. But actually, you know, I saw the more recent trailers and it didn't look half bad. And, you know, honestly, like Transformers 1, the movie that Michael Bay did, was pretty good. I liked the first Transformers. Everything after that's been total shit. But the first one was really good. And so I think maybe Ninja Turtles will actually end up being all right. And hey, Megan Fox is in it, right? It's a fine April O'Neil. So the first one is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time. Yeah, that's our first game out of our top 8. And this is a classic, maybe not as well remembered as its predecessor, the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game, but this is the sequel to the arcade game, and this came out in September of 91. So, you know, this is an oldie, but it's still a really, I think everybody still recognizes it as being a really classic game. It's gotten re-released a few times with a lot of bonus content, and people put stuff in. I think Xbox Live Arcade, they have the reshelled version of Turtles in Time. There's a classic song on this. Or one of the classic songs played within the game is I think it was Pizza Power, which is off of the Coming Out of Our Shells tour album, which I happen to have in Google Play Music. Very proud of that. Anyway, this isn't available on Google Play Music. I put it in there. I love that album. So yeah, this is a really great game, and it's, you know, it's what do you call a side scrolling, or not? It's not even side scrolling, a scrolling beat 'em up, where you can choose one of the 4 turtles, of course, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, or Leonardo. Donatello was always my favorite. And, and you can get 4 players together if you played it in the arcade. It came out for Super Nintendo too. It did a console run, which was pretty good, admittedly. It wasn't bad at all. It wasn't like the fiasco of when the original Ninja Turtles arcade game came out, and what you got for the consoles was a completely different game that was kind of rough. So, but Turtles in Time did a pretty faithful porting to Super Nintendo anyway. And it's a classic game. It has great music. It's really intense. The story, albeit, not deep. I mean, it's Ninja Turtles. It's still like it kept you engaged. It kept you going. And I mean, I remember, I was 10 years old when this, or no, maybe, 10 years old when this came out. And I kept cranking in those quarters. Kept cranking them, cranking. I mean, I didn't stop. So this was a hit. This was a big deal in arcades. And, a few of these games on our top 8 are going to be arcade games because in the 90s, arcades were still a really big freaking deal. I don't think speaking of that, I don't think arcades now they're still popular. In fact, there's a couple of great ones in New Hampshire. Ironically, one of them's world famous. But I don't think arcades became where people really saw them as perhaps useless in comparison to consoles until Soul Calibur came out for Dreamcast. And Soul Calibur, because what happened is that when Soul Calibur came out and it came out for the Dreamcast pretty much around the same time, the Dreamcast version actually looked better, played better, and had more options than the arcade version of it. And I think that's when people said, holy shit, I don't need to go to the arcade anymore. Because Soul Calibur was a big deal. Of course, Soul Calibur was the sequel to Soul Blade or Soul Edge, depending on which, where you played that game. So, the arcade was still a big deal. Turtles in Time did bank because it was so much fun. It had the graphics were fantastic. It looked very much like you were playing the cartoon, which was still an achievement back then, to pull that off. Because it's not like Dragon's Lair where you only pressed one button. This, you had full combos you could do, and each character was a little bit different in what they offered. And as far as, the weaponry and fighting style, I mean, it was a cool game. And Ninja Turtles was, this is even before Power Rangers came out. I love both franchises, and Ninja Turtles was the shit at the time. And so to have, a game that really brought that so much to life or made it so interactive, you're guaranteed for it to be huge. And the original, the original Ninja Turtles arcade game was great too. But, and so how could you top it without it being the same thing? They pulled it off. They really did. And like I said, this game keeps getting re-released, and I recommend any of the re-releases. I don't think it's on Steam, but, find it, grab it, because there's a lot of great content out there for it now. I love it. Just an awesome, awesome game. So, okay, Turtles in Time, just a little bit more on that. This was a very popular type of game back in the day. In fact, there are other great ones that aren't making our top 8. But there's Alien versus Predator, which really should have made our top 8. This was great. Not a first-person shooter. It was just a scrolling beat 'em up. And that was another one where the characters that you chose actually had different abilities. It wasn't like Double Dragon. They're all copying Double Dragon, right? But in Double Dragon, Billy and Jimmy pretty much had the same abilities. And, you could, like, the cool thing is that you could pick up various weapons, like, whips and bats, and pick up barrels and all that stuff. And most of these games implemented a lot of that, but then they gave you, really a customized feel, especially like Turtles in Time and Aliens versus Predator, where you definitely, by the way, I always played the Warrior Predator. That guy was amazing. Where you definitely felt it, because there's another, you felt the uniqueness and that you were really contributing. It's really the precursor, and I don't think a lot of people realize it, but it's really the precursor to raids that get done in MMOs, like World of Warcraft, where you have a healer and you have this person. This was definitely the precursor to that, to where different people playing the game side by side. And this is where I think they're superior, because the person has to actually be in the room with you. Of course, there's some abilities to emulate on PC and not have to have the person with you. But that kind of spoils the fun, in my opinion. The person had to be right next to you, and they had to contribute their own abilities. And a game that kind of tried to do that, and boy, it was just so cool to play the characters, was Captain America and the Avengers, which came out in the early 90s. And this is cool because it had Vision in it. And Vision is one of my favorite Avengers. He's an android. Actually, it was a she in Ultimate, in the Ultimates, which I thought was cool. But Vision is awesome, and that was great. But a lot of the characters sort of played the same. He had the same abilities, and even if they didn't have the same abilities, like to where Captain America can't fly, he ended up where Wonder Man would give him a vehicle to fly on or something like that. So you didn't really have that same aspect like you did with Turtles in Time and Aliens versus Predator, or maybe even like Knights of the Round. That was another really cool one. Knights of the Round, where each character could deliver its own, its own abilities, and they actually mattered, and you could get really strategic with it. So kudos to Turtles in Time. I thought they did a great job with that. Scrolling beat 'em ups are seemingly a lost art. I wish they'd come back. There's Double Dragon Neon, and that was really nice. In fact, you can get that on Steam as well as PS3. That we need more of those again. So sorely missed. But so Turtles in Time. Let's go ahead. Let's get on to our next game. And I'm going to, let's see, which one we're going to go with. All right, let's do this, because these are never in any order. I'll tell you, there's one game in this list that I consider perhaps to be the greatest video game interactive experience ever. Two of the greatest, because they're kind of different animals, right? We'll go over those in a minute. But this one, Panzer Dragoon. This is a game that was serious as a heart attack when it came out. It came out for the Sega Saturn, which was a system so far ahead of its time. This was a system that could connect to the internet pretty much when it came out, or at least a couple of years after it came out. But Panzer Dragoon came out in 95, and it is an absolute classic. It was one of the first games to where, some people wanted to say, it's just a Star Fox clone, to where you had actual polygon 3D effects, 3D graphics. But no, this is no clone. You were in, this wasn't just some static ship that you were flying around in like the R-Wing in Star Fox. This Panzer Dragoon was a game where you were, the dragon's wings flapped, you were firing stuff off, kind of played like Afterburner, of course, also made by Sega. And not an entirely deep storyline by any stretch of the imagination, but the gameplay was just so amazing. And it was one of those rare times where it's like, holy shit, I feel like I'm riding a dragon. And it was great. It was the launch game for the Sega Saturn. And I think a lot of people, saw that when they went to Toys R Us or whatever, store, maybe electronics boutique where they went to play their video games. And there, in a bright white, looking like the future, stand display, there was the black Sega Saturn promising, so much. And you saw Panzer Dragoon and you picked up that controller, which had a good heft to it. The Saturn controller really felt great. And you started flying around on a dragon. And it was an unforgettable experience. It really was. This was, really, even because you could call it a flight simulator. It's not, but you could call it a flight simulator. And there's some other flight simulators on this list, which are also a lost art that are fortunately making a huge comeback. This is one of the ones where you really, you found yourself moving with the character you're controlling, with the dragon. And that's how you got a great game, is when you get absolutely lost in it. And now the graphics today obviously look somewhat archaic, but I think there's a charm in those graphics. And there was a sequel. There was Panzer Dragoon Orta that came out later. I don't know that this has ever been re-released in any way that you can really get your hands on now and play easily, though, boy, I wish it would. It was a top-notch game. It was an experience. What you can do really is go to YouTube and just watch some gameplay videos of it. And I think even if you're not holding the controller, you're going to find yourself just kind of moving with it because the world was so vast and grand that you were flying in. I mean, it might look basic now, but they applied it so well, which is what Sega used to be really good at. That's why Sonic was such a big deal because yes, there was the attitude. Yes, there was the speed, but it was the fact that the way you moved in Sonic games, the level was designed to enhance or to make that movement look good. And Panzer Dragoon did the same thing. It just took it to the heights. Absolutely classic game. Lots and lots of fun. I think there's some PC versions of it out there that might have gotten emulated a bit. And there's I think actually, yeah, I think it did come out for PC, and it came out for, with when you got Orta, because Panzer Dragoon Orta came out years later. Okay, because Panzer Dragoon came out in 95, but they released it for the Xbox. A lot of Sega titles got exclusive release to the original Xbox. And in Orta, you could unlock the original Panzer Dragoon. And what a good time that was. I had an original Xbox. I actually really liked that system. I definitely saw it as more than just the Halo box. It had some really wild ideas that if everything didn't go into online multiplayer, Xbox was heading really in the right direction of, how to do multiplayer with everybody coming over to your house. And of course, talk about lost arts or, things that are missing. That's something that's missing. I mean, come on, remember GoldenEye? GoldenEye's not on the list because everybody remembers GoldenEye. For a lot of people, that was kind of their first video game, and they got so hooked into it because you had that interactive sitting right next to you experience. It was really something. So Panzer Dragoon, go ahead and check that out. It had a prequel, had a couple sequels. There was Panzer Dragoon Saga, and of course Orta that I mentioned. I mean, this is a franchise, and really it's a franchise I think that needs to make a big comeback in a big way, maybe on Steam. I think that could really happen. And it's important. There's a great RPG that came out in the 90s called Legend of Dragoon. They're not related at all. I think when I first picked up Legend of Dragoon for PlayStation, for the PS1, I was like, oh man, another Panzer Dragoon game. I was so excited. And, at the time, you didn't so much have, the internet wasn't the monolith of information that it is now. I didn't know. And so I bought it, and then I found out it wasn't actually anything to do with Panzer Dragoon, but then Legend of Dragoon was fucking amazing. I mean, just one of the best RPGs out there ever. In fact, it has a great soundtrack. I have a 4-disc version of the soundtrack. It's phenomenal. So, but that is not on our top 8. I think we're probably listing 16 games here, right? Anyway, so Panzer Dragoon, go ahead and give that one a good look. But I just mentioned the PlayStation, while we're talking about that, let's knock out a couple of PlayStation games that actually there's 3 PlayStation games on here. And that really shows the dominance that Sony really had. And I'm a huge Nintendo fan, and I'm a huge Sega fan. I love Sega. But Sony admittedly was cornering the market with the PlayStation in the 90s, in the late 90s. And they were delivering great stuff. They started off with a great idea of just porting PC titles. And then what they did is people said, okay, well, how can we make these PC titles, this style of gameplay and just make it really native to a console and to the DualShock controller. And they did it. And in fact, one of those games, I'm actually going to talk mainly about the sequel, which was by a company called Psygnosis. And they made a trilogy of games for PlayStation called Colony Wars. There's Colony Wars Vengeance, and then Colony Wars 3 Red Sun. And this was something they advertised the shit out of the first one. Like they knew the gold that they had. They wanted to make this a really big deal. And the first Colony Wars came out, and it is a flight simulator. Okay. Flight sim, space sim, maybe the more accurate term, where you were in a little fighter, a little starfighter, and you have various missions to do. And in Colony Wars, you are told in the first one, the real beauty to play is the second one, Vengeance, which came out in 98. But in the first Colony Wars, you are told you're part of a rebellion trying to destroy break free from the evil Earth Empire. And I'm not really giving anything away in this because you're going to look it up on Wikipedia anyway. But what happens is in the second one, Colony Wars Vengeance, you find out that all of your heroism that you did in the first Colony Wars, which is a great game, totally delivered the feel of, okay, I'm in a starfighter. It really did a great job of that and had gravity effects, all this wild stuff. But Colony Wars Vengeance, what you find out is it was all a lie. Your heroism in the first one wasn't heroism at all. You were a tyrannical rebellion. And you crushed the Earth. And so Vengeance is all about getting vengeance, on this. But it was so wild because Colony Wars, the first one, was such a great experience that you thought to yourself, oh, wow, that was so good. And I got a medal and everything's happy-go-lucky. And, just like every time you beat Wing Commander, you save the day. You're the hero in the game, blah, blah, blah. But then when the second one comes out and now the first Colony Wars wasn't that popular, unfortunately. I really wish it was because it deserves to get re-released big time. And it's just not available. I have to play it on Android to, with an emulator to really pull it off well. But the people that did know about Colony Wars and that were excited about Colony Wars were just dying for the second one. And when the second one came out, everybody's just like, holy shit, I was the bad guy. That's a mind fuck in itself, especially if you're a teenager or a kid, in the 90s playing that. And so Colony Wars Vengeance, it definitely did the job, a much better job of, it added quite a bit. The graphics got way better because in the 90s, I don't think graphics are required for a great game. Obviously, I'm hoping to prove that with my own game that I'm developing. But in the 90s, graphic power was important. Like that was always the first question. What are the graphics like for any game that came out? And Colony Wars Vengeance totally delivered on that. And in some ways, I thought it was, at its time in 98, I thought it was maybe the best looking flight sim out there. Better than even what was on PC. And it had a better feel, and it had really tight controls. I was so impressed. And there were great games coming out, great flight sims or space sims at the time, still coming out for PC. It was, before the dearth occurred in the aughts. But yeah, this is a little known game, I think, that a lot of people don't touch. And this is the one, if you're willing to go through the work that it takes to get a copy of Colony Wars, of the Colony Wars trilogy, or at least just the second one, and what it takes to get an emulator, a PlayStation emulator up and running on whatever system you got, this is the one you want to jump on because it was an awesome experience. You felt like everything felt so good, kind of like how in Babylon 5, how everything looked, the Star Furies, okay, which were the starfighters in Babylon 5, how they had, thrusters and everything that looked like, yeah, that's really how you'd have to develop that technology. Same deal with this one. Everything just felt good, and it felt like, yeah, this is how this would react. An incredibly unique experience. Now, it's not the greatest space sim ever, but I'm going to save that one for a little bit. But we will be talking about that. Anyway, let's get into the next game. And this one is also a PlayStation game. And this, ironically, is probably the latest released of the bunch because this came out in around Christmas of 2000. And you might be a little shocked that that this is one of the games. But I mentioned to you, I would tell you which game was top of the heap. Okay. And there's a little bit of a tie here. But you'll find out that was a pun. There's a little bit of tie here, but this is a game, again, different animal from the other greatest game in this list. But this one is really, I'll explain why it's so great. And it's Smackdown 2, Know Your Role. That's right, WWE. It's a wrestling game. It came out for PlayStation. It is the sequel to, of course, the original Smackdown game, which was really good on its own. But this game, a lot of people talk about, you take games like Witcher, great series of games, or you take, the not Skyrim, you take the Elder Scrolls games. Skyrim's one of those. You take a lot of these games where people are so happy that you get to customize so much and that you have a lot of control over your character, what happens, all of that. I don't think a lot of people realize, but THQ, which was the development house for Smackdown 2, really created that ability in a large way. Yes, it existed on PC for a while before, again, with the aforementioned Elder Scrolls games, but to make it graphically feasible and appeasing, and enjoyable. THQ pulled that off with Smackdown 2. You could spend, this is a wrestling game, you go through seasons, with your character, or, with your favorite wrestler of your choice. Obviously, you could be Triple H, Undertaker, Kane, Shawn Michaels, I don't think was in that. I had to create Shawn Michaels. Various characters. And you could unlock them, which was really popular with fighting games. And in ways, this is a fighting game. It was kind of a button masher, so it wasn't so strategic as some other wrestling games like WrestleMania 2000 or WCW versus NWO that came out for the N64. This is more of a button masher for PlayStation, but it was definitely, in my opinion, the far better of the games. And like I said, one of, if not the best game of all time. And I'll explain why. And it is because it was such a personal experience, because THQ put so many options, customizing options in the game for you to create your character and made it look so good with the limited graphic abilities of the year 2000 and the PS1 that, you thought you were in the game. Like, you could create you. You would spend, and you could customize your move set. You could even create moves in it. The possibilities were seemingly endless. And these games are still very popular. They keep a new one coming out every year. WWE 2015 and whatever else. Which, in fact, that one has Sting in it. Ooh boy! But that was the thing too. Is that if your favorite wrestler, while they might not have been able to, because at the time this is still where kind of WCW and WWE, or at the time WWF, were at odds with each other. THQ had the clever idea that if we put in all these customizing options, we can actually let people, even though we can't legally put said wrestler like Sting or Hogan or whoever into the game, we can put all this stuff into the game, call it something else, and then people could create their favorite wrestlers. You could have a roster unlimited of all the greats, and not just of all the wrestling greats. You could have Bruno Sammartino. Okay, you could have Superfly Jimmy Snuka. You take your pick of the guys you wanted in this game, and all you had to do was take the time to create them. But you could create you. And not just you. You could create your dream woman. Whatever you wanted. You could have your dream, and you could put managers. You had where you could have a valet. You could create stables like D-Generation X or the Four Horsemen. You could create Ric Flair. Woo! Oh, this was amazing. Not just for a wrestling fan. This is a great game if you are wanting the most personal gaming experience that you can have. This is it. Now, the newer ones are just even better. They're on steroids. But this is the one where really you saw the potential of what video games could be and the personal experience that they could be. This is huge. You played the game for hours because you enjoyed just seeing you, because if you created you enjoyed seeing you doing all these wild moves, maybe a diving elbow off the top rope or whatever. But, the other thing, too, is you'd spend hours doing that. And, of course, your friends could create themselves and, you could all play and wrestle with each other digitally. You could do it analog, out in your front yard, too, or backyard. But this is obviously a lot safer, right? And so you could do that. But that was the other thing, too. You could spend just as much time creating characters like yourself or, your dream valet or, whatever you wanted, whoever you wanted to create. And you could create some pretty far out things, too. You didn't have to be, realistic with it. You would spend hours just developing your characters. And I mean hours. Like, I created me in the game And I think I spent 4.5 hours just creating my character, taking it to that level. And it was fantastic. Guy was triple black, looking good, I mean, and especially at the time, for whatever reason, I bought into dressing significantly classier. And, so, I mean, my wrestler would come out wearing, a leather, a leather suit coat and black khakis and a black button-up shirt, and he'd get in the ring and make it happen. Oh, it's tremendous. And then I'd have, just a beautiful digital woman, always at my side, who she could, of course, kick some serious ass, because I love strong and powerful women. And it's great. Yeah. I mean, you really, like, better than The Sims, you created you, and you had a digital presence. It is top notch. It is all I can do. Now, I'm not so much I'm not a wrestling fan anymore. Okay. But I grew up in New York. And so at the time, I was a wrestling fan. It was kind of, it was like being a Yankees fan. It's sort of what you were. It takes all I can do to not want to get a modern console system. And if I did, I'd probably get a PS4. But it takes all I can do to not get one of those just to play the WWE games. Nothing to do with wrestling. It just totally has to do with the fact that you are really you. You craft your own story more so than even Elder Scrolls or Witcher games. Okay. I mean, it's just amazing. Now, I mean, of course, unlike Witcher or some other great games like Jade Empire, you can't necessarily go off and fuck somebody. You can certainly allude to it, or have a harem or some kind of, business like that. But it is a very personal experience, and they still are just some of the best games you can really get your hands on. And if you're a wrestling fan, I mean, wow, you're guaranteed a great time. So anyway, that's Smackdown 2. Again, a game that is it is probably the most overlooked game that we've talked about so far, or maybe out of all of them, because nobody pays attention to just how much THQ really put into that as far as customization, and how important that would end up being for gaming in the future. And even, like I said, even still today, there's not really many games that pull it off to that level. Even of Smackdown 2, it is an absolute classic. If you've got the ability if you have a PS2 or you have a PS1 and you've got the chance, I'm sure you can get a copy of Smackdown 2 for a song. I mean, you could get it so cheap. And I think you'll find what a great experience that was. Or, of course, you can grab one of the newer ones too, but it's kind of interesting to see the origins of these things. So yes, the greatest game of all time may very well be Smackdown 2 by from the WWE. I know that'll blow your mind, but there it is. So let's move on a bit. Maybe shake things up just a little here, and let's go to the other. Why don't I just go ahead and talk about the other greatest game of all time? And this one is great in very similar ways into the full experience that you get, and your direct importance in it, and your ability to express your own style. And this is something that has been a game of the week in the past. And I tried not to talk about games that have been game of the week, but I guess in some ways I kind of can't help it, right? If I'm going to be honest with you about what some of the greatest games of the 90s were that maybe you hadn't heard of. And this one is Star Wars TIE Fighter. Now, this is a space sim, similar to like I talked about with Colony Wars. And this is a game, now it's a sequel to X-Wing. Okay, to the original X-Wing space sim. And TIE Fighter, now, both of those games eventually came out, CD-ROM just became a big deal. And so they later on, like a year after their original releases, they'd have expansion packs, which was really wild, for games to have expansion packs. Keep in mind, expansion packs, okay? This is the early 90s. There's no internet. They didn't call it DLC back then. They called it expansion packs. But everybody's like, oh, DLC is the greatest thing to ever hit consoles. Well, like with every other kind of game, the PC's already been doing it for 30 years, or 20 years or however long. And so TIE Fighter had some, some DLC, what they called expansion packs. The original X-Wing game did as well. And a year later or so, they would come out with what they called a collector's edition CD-ROM. And these are the editions to get your hands on if you want to play the game. And the collector's edition CD-ROM was very much like the, guess what? Like for the consoles, what do they call them now? Game of the Year editions. 20 years ago. Moving on. So TIE Fighter, a tremendous game. And you were, like we mentioned with Colony Wars, where you were playing the bad guy. This came out before Colony Wars did. This came out in 94. And in this one, you knew exactly what you were doing. You were the bad guy. Okay. You were not fighting for the rebellion. You were fighting for the Empire. And not only that, this is the real cincher. I mean, the graphics for what they were, they did some updated versions of that as well. There was like a Windows 95 version that had much better 3D graphics where it got more polygony than drawn. And all of that's great. It had a great feel. Unlike the Wing Commander games, which I hope you know, I love the Wing Commander games. In fact, Wing Commander 3 is out for free right now on Origin. Definitely grab that if you want to play a great game from the 90s with, ironically, Luke Skywalker in it, or, Mark Hamill. But unlike the Wing Commander games, with the Star Wars flight simulators, space simulators, you really felt like you were flying. Like there was stars going past you, the whole thing. It was a very different. I always describe the Wing Commander games, and the Wing Commander games were far better, other than TIE Fighter, were far better with story than the Star Wars games were. Okay. So that's what led them to go along. But the Wing Commander games, I always said, it's like, boy, I feel like I'm flying a desk. Like this just doesn't feel right. And, but TIE Fighter felt great. And I just mentioned kind of the key thing here. I said how Wing Commander always had better story. TIE Fighter was the one where it did not best, because TIE Fighter had a tremendous story. Very overarching. If you paid attention to it. And not only that, there's points where you're in the hangar bay. Okay, now you don't walk around or anything, but you're in the hangar bay and you have the mouse and you can choose to talk to various people that give you mission orders and all that. And at certain points in the game, you'll see somebody standing off to the right or to the left, just way up top. In fact, actually, at one point you talk to Darth Vader. But there's this cloaked figure, and it's not the Emperor, but there's this cloaked figure, really mysterious looking guy, and you click on him, and there's, just kind of like this older guy. Sort of looks like the Emperor, obviously, because he's working for him, and says there, and tells you this entire subplot about, kind of a defection going on within the Empire. And you get to join this secret order of dark side initiates through him. And it is just so deep. And you just go, hey, wait a minute. This is really cool. It was. And you get like, because one of the cool things then with TIE Fighter, and it was one of the original games to implement this, X-Wing and TIE Fighter both did this, where there's a point where you got medals, okay, which were analogous to achievements today in consoles, again, being done 20 years ago. It's nice for consoles to catch up. But with TIE Fighter, you got the badges just like you did in X-Wing, where your uniform, and you got medals and all the stuff, just like any person serving in a military of sorts would. But then you could look on, when you joined that secret order of the Emperor, your arm was there, your right arm, and you could hover the mouse over that, and then you'd pull back your sleeve, and there were like these tattoos with all these weird symbols on it. And the whole thing just felt like you had that secret aspect to it, that really deep subplot, and you didn't have to play the subplot at all. You could completely ignore it. And so there was a lot of replayability with this game, but just the depth was amazing. And the feeling it kind of gave you, especially when you're a young person, you just thought it was awesome. And admittedly, I don't mind saying it. You're like, yeah, the Empire. I like these guys. So to say nothing of the fact that actually one of my favorite starships, or vessels, I guess, in the entire Star Wars series comes from that game. and it was this experimental. It was called the TIE Defender, and I actually up until very recently had a little model of that up until I moved to New Hampshire because they released it for the Titanium series. And it is this badass looking TIE fighter. And it has shields. It has a tractor beam. And this was so wild. Like I said, you could kind of go with your own style. This TIE fighter, the TIE Defender, had and it was only in this game. I've never seen it outside of it, really, sadly. It had a tractor beam built onto it. And what you could do is you could get behind a rebel fighter, like an X-Wing. An A-Wing might have been too fast to get away. But you could get behind an X-Wing or a Y-Wing, turn on the tractor beam, and they're just stuck. And then just fire at will, baby. Lock on and let them go. Oh, and it had a huge missile loadout and all that. It was almost too good. But it allowed you to do such wild things. And you only get to use it really more towards the end of the game anyway. So they made sure to save the best for last. But fantastic. And you had a bunch of different ship styles to fly, especially in comparison to X-Wing, where you only had, 3 or 4, if that. This one, you got to deliver the goods. And with whatever, and you could even, that was the other beautiful thing, is you could kind of choose what starships you wanted to use. This is something that would be popular in the Rogue Squadron games later on, particularly with the GameCube versions of Rogue Squadron, the 2 and 3. Just tremendous. And there really hasn't been, I don't feel, there hasn't been a game that has successfully pulled off to this level, you playing the bad guys and making it interesting and actually making you feel good about it. It's awesome. So it's very tough to not call it the greatest game of all time because of so much that it achieved. You totally felt like you were in a TIE fighter. You had the great ability to look around all the different windows because TIE fighters, they have a bunch of different viewports. You could look out of all of them. I mean, this was a full experience in 1994. Talk about a game due for a re-release. Oh, man. That would sell, like no tomorrow. I guarantee it. Even all they had to do, even if they just updated the graphics even more and they just left the gameplay completely the same, I think people would jump on it. Make it look like Rogue Squadron 3 was a Rebel Strike. That was the tremendous looking Star Wars game, probably still the best looking to date for GameCube. So TIE Fighter, amazing. Whether you're a Rebel fan or an Empire fan when it comes to Star Wars, there's just loads of enjoyment and a whole lot going on and a great story. And really, there's so much to do. It's one of those games, again, 1994, where you really could just get lost, in what you were doing. And you had a lot of different styles that you could do things in. It had an achievement system built into it back then, but it actually gave you something in game, and it did it in a really cool way. It's not unlockables. This is achievements being done long before they were ever popular on consoles. So TIE Fighter, phenomenal. There's a torrent out there, and it comes and goes, but there's a torrent that allows you to play TIE Fighter pretty natively on Windows 7 64-bit. That's probably the best version you can get your hands on. It has the most updated graphics, and because it's a tough game to get working on any system that you have, even on DOSBox. With DOSBox, I think you have to actually download the DOS versions, not the collector CD-ROMs, but you have to download the DOS, the original diskette versions of the games to really be able to play them. So look for that. But that's enough about TIE Fighter, but hot damn do I love that game. Let's see. Let's go to another one. Yeah, let's swing back to the PlayStation here for a minute. Arc the Lad. Arc the Lad is something that I think a lot of people played really, like they released a big set for the PS1 and, in the late 90s. And it was, it was more or less your standard fare RPG game. In fact, it plays a lot like what I intend my RPG to play like. And there's 3 different segments to it, but again, usually you played Arc the Lad complete. Then there was a sequel that came out for the PS2, of course, and that was a fine game too. But Arc the Lad was so good for the reasons that the trilogy of games that you played, your save files worked between them. And like you saved your character as you went through each game when they released the complete edition for PS1. And that was kind of unique at the time. That's kind of popular with Mass Effect, right? Where what you do in the first game, you can port over to the second or third game, and it will, affect you accordingly. Arc the Lad was the first one to really do that, and it had a great story. It's a classic story. It's a story not that different from, say, Golden Sun or any of the Final Fantasy games, but it was executed really well. There was some degree of time travel that was really well. Talk about, not a 90s game, but talk about a great game. Radiant Historia for the Nintendo DS. It's the only system it was ever released for, where time travel was a big deal. But you kind of get that with Arc the Lad, and you feel like you've played, much like when you go through the original Star Wars trilogy, you feel like you followed an entire lifetime of your heroes. And you definitely get that with Arc the Lad. Probably, one of my favorite RPGs of all time, but admittedly, it's only great when all three of them are accounted for. Where you can see how your character can develop throughout all three of them, and how decisions you make in one affect the other. Really tremendous. There's not a whole lot more to say about it other than that. The graphics, it's 90s RPG. It's pretty standard fare. It's not Final Fantasy VII. It's using more or less your 16-bit type characters, but it looked great. And the soundtrack's phenomenal. A lot of people remember Arc the Lad and really enjoyed it. PlayStation did that for a while, where they were releasing big sets of RPGs, like they did Lunar's, the Silver Star story, and they released them in beautiful packaging. That's something too. Packaging isn't a big deal anymore, even though they keep trying to make it a big deal on consoles, where buy the Extreme Edition and we'll give you this, 17-inch maquette, and all this stuff. But then PlayStation was really pulling it off well with giving you a lot of value out of what you bought. And so the presentation of even just the box was really impressive for the time. And it wasn't overbearing to where you're going to end up filling your room with a bunch of shit. It looked good. You wanted to display the game as much as you wanted to play it, which, we've talked about a lot of Lost Arts. There's another one. So, but awesome game, awesome series of games, including the one for the PS2 that came out many years later. So that's Arc the Lad, the trilogy. Let's see. Let's go into, let's get back into polygons. We only got a couple more to go, and I don't want this to go much past an hour. But let's go back into the realm of polygons. And then the last game that we're going to talk about is really a doozy that a lot of people don't know about, but you can play right now. But this game was, now in the 90s, one of the hottest things, especially in the arcade, was fighting games. Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3, yada, yada, yada. Tekken, the Tekken games, which, boy, Tekken 3, awesome game, but a little obvious, I think, to choose. But the series that I actually always enjoyed the most of the fighting games, and I love all those. I love Tekken. Street Fighter's great. Can't wait. Ultra Street Fighter 4 is coming out in like a week. And Mortal Kombat is fantastic. But Virtua Fighter by Sega, this was nuts, and it looked wild. When you went into the arcade and you saw this, you saw characters, didn't look very realistic. Okay, but it was all polygons. It was all 3D. It was completely 3D. And in fact, it pulled off 3D, especially in fighting, far better than what Tekken did, because Tekken was kind of the same deal, where it was a 3D fighter, more so, which in comparison to Mortal Kombat and like Primal Rage, and another great game, Primal Rage, and Street Fighter 2, where it was all very 2D. These were real 3D, and nobody did it better at the time in the early 90s than the very first Virtua Fighter, which came out in like 93, I think. And then they did a re-release in 95. They did a remix that was awesome. But this was, not a huge cast of characters by any means. And it's probably because it was so difficult. I mean, I don't know exactly how much RAM it took to, render all of those 3D images and polygons. But so to have a ton of characters would have been an issue. But they were great. The characters that you had were really great. In fact, my favorite male character was a guy named Wolf. And Wolf was Wolf Hawkfield. And he was this like Native American guy in the game. And it was really great because he'd like howl like a wolf whenever he'd win. He'd do this big, oh, it was, it was awesome. And so, great gameplay. And again, it was so different to play. And I think that was the exciting thing about Virtua Fighter, especially. Tekken, kind of similar, I know, but we're talking about Virtua Fighter. It was so, I think a lot of people got attracted to it because you figured out a lot of really great button mashing techniques with the 2D fighters like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. And so I think a lot of arcade goers felt like they were on an even playing field. Like the board had been reset for Virtua Fighter to where it was all new. And so I think that was a big attraction for a lot of people, but it was the controls were very intuitive and you learned pretty quickly, how to do really great stuff. But it was a totally different way of thinking for video games at the time. And I mean, 2D fighters, like X-Men, Children of the Atom and so on, Marvel versus Capcom, all that would go on for a long time. And they still go on to this day, but they would be still kind of the kings and the most popular. But maybe a lot of that was just because some people actually didn't want to think so differently that was required for a 3D fighter like Virtua Fighter. It was tremendous. And it was sexy. Actually, it was pretty sexy. There's another character in it, Sarah Bryant, kind of a blonde, high heels. I don't care much for high heels, but, she was, in triple black. And I mean, a lot of people thought like with Mortal Kombat that Sonya Blade, the female character of Sonya Blade would, that it was hot when she would kind of cross her legs over your face and flip you over. Believe me, it didn't compare to the stuff that Sarah did in Virtua Fighter, not by a long shot. She would mount you. Yes, it's a video game. Come on. I was a teenager. So were so many of us all. Come on. It was so good. I love the game. And really, once again, the impetus for, so many fighting games, and not just fighting games, but even games like Mario 64 and others, 3D games in general into the future, even things like Bubsy. Okay. I think took a lot of their cues from the design and the controls of games like Virtua Fighter. And Virtua Fighter is still relatively popular. Virtua Fighter 5 came out a little while back, and everybody, comes right out and says that, this is the most realistic and in-depth fighting experience you can get. Virtua Fighter always delivers that, whether it's in consoles or arcades. It's a great series, easily my favorite fighting game series out there, even though I don't talk about it much. Usually I end up talking about Mortal Kombat, but that's because I like to do tournaments with that. So Virtua Fighter, I'm pretty sure you could crank up MAME and you could give this a shot. Or of course, Virtua Fighter 2, I think even came out did that come out for Genesis? It came out for one of those systems you can emulate. So, but awesome game. Just tremendous. Now let's, we're still kind of on the Sega roll. Let's go to the world of the Dreamcast. And this game, it was originally released on the Dreamcast in 2000. It was also released on Windows in 99. And it was recently re-released on Steam. So this is one you can play. And there's really a lot of games I think have taken cues from this. And I think I've been saying that about a lot of the games here, but that's part of why they're such great games and maybe why they're unheard of. Because, most people didn't realize just how ingenious a lot of them were. Omikron, the Nomad Soul. Now, the initial selling point to this game was that the lead character that's controlling the universe you're exploring is David Bowie. Yes, that David Bowie. Now, the unique thing about this game that was really, David Bowie made a song for the game, which he re-released later without using the chorus of Omikron for it. The unique thing is that it was one of the very first games, and certainly one of the more ingenious ones, that broke the fourth wall. Now, the fourth wall, of course, is a movie term where say, a character in a film, like you take a movie like The Happiest Millionaire from the 60s, where the butler would keep talking to you, talking to you, the audience. That's breaking the fourth wall, okay? Because, technically the fourth wall is the camera. And so if you go through the camera, that's how they do it. So this game, and, there was another game that did this really well, which was Metal Gear Solid 2, I think, where suddenly the colonel starts talking to you saying, yeah, you holding the controller. Omikron kind of did the same thing, but what it did, it took it to Dot Hack would do this later too, but it took it to the the nth degree, where it treated you like, hey, I know you're sitting there on Earth because all this took place on the world Phanon. I know you're sitting there on Earth. I'm going to transport your soul, essentially, or leave your dimension. And, you're going to enter Omikron within like this Omikronian police officer is the guy that talks to you first and is going to say, look, you can inhabit my body. And so it's really creating this entire situation. And this is a third person adventure game, essentially, kind of like a Tomb Raider style. Okay. But taking place on a very futuristic city on this planet called Phanon. And this officer says, look, I'm going to let you leave your dimension and come into me. And the game's telling you this. Okay. Eternal Darkness was another game that would do this for GameCube, but we'll save that game for when we talk about the greatest games of the aughts. And that was really cool. Like, cause just when you start playing the game, you get this great, of course it does the music, it has a great intro, which a lot of games in the 90s had that, like Legacy of Kain or, Soul Reaver, where they had this tremendous intro. This had a great atmospheric intro. It showed you what Phanon looked like, what a lot of the cities looked like on there, because it's a very metropolitan world. And of course the music from David Bowie playing in it. And David Bowie was still, a very big figure. He still is today, but in the 90s, he was still a big deal. Had that great song, I'm Afraid of Americans. I love that shit. And, you're taken around, and then as soon as you get into the game, instantly the game is talking to you. It's awesome. And it wasn't just talking to you. It was actually trying to give you a believable way to experience the game. In the game, it has your various puzzles. In some ways, it played like an Ocarina of Time. In some ways, I wouldn't necessarily compare it to that game. But awesome. And it had a really well-developed world. And of course, there comes the point where you have to confront the mighty David Bowie, which is, enjoyable in itself. And, it can be kind of a scary game at times, and it could sort of mess with your head, much like Eternal Darkness did in the aughts. This was a game that thought way ahead on how a game can literally interact, literally as in talk to you, interact with the player. And so this is a far out experience. Okay. And like I said, you can get it on Steam, and I think it can be had for pretty cheap. I have it. Awesome game. Awesome experience. Has a great ambiance. The whole thing is just this tremendous science fiction, exploration game. And I think it wasn't well known or wasn't so popular. Clearly it's a bit of a cult hit since it got released on Steam. I think they only do that with certain games, even though Steam can be kind of funny with, sometimes they'll just release a game and they won't do anything. And it's not really Steam's fault, or Valve, of course, is the company. It's not really Valve's fault. But sometimes they'll get the release and nobody will update, like say the DLLs to make the game work properly in Windows 7 or Windows 8 or in 64-bit operating systems or whichever. And that sucks. But Omikron plays really well. So clearly, there's a lot of people that really liked it, not just myself. But I don't think it was a huge hit, especially when it was released on Dreamcast. I don't think it was a huge hit because it's not like a terribly exciting game. It is very much, but that's the nice, like, I like science fiction when it's not so, boom, bang, blah, explosion, yada, yada, yada. And, I like it where it's really thought-provoking. And this is one of those games that's very thought-provoking. It kind of, maybe you could say it has a Blade Runner feel, which, boy, Blade Runner by Westwood Studios in the 90s. Another fucking classic. But anyway, so I recommend this. This is a game that, as long as, you have patience and you don't need action, check this out, because they put a lot of thought into the world, into Phanon and into the development overall. And you can see it and you can tell, just a total labor of love and way ahead of its time, I think, as far as I know there's a couple of games that are even older than it that tried to go through the fourth wall. But this one really did it in a very unique way that I don't know that's necessarily been messed with at any other time. So give it a look. Easy enough to download, and get your hands on and start playing. So that's it. I think we'll end it right there. That's our top 8. We'll run them through real quick one more time. Of course, there was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time. We have Smackdown 2, Colony Wars Vengeance, Ark the Lad, Star Wars TIE Fighter, Panzer Dragoon, Virtua Fighter, and of course, Omikron. A lot of Sega in there. Well, not a lot, but anyway, if you've played these, if you have thoughts on them, you can email me. We can shoot the shit if I get the opportunity. And just let me know what you think. And let me know what you think about these top 8s. If you think it's just like a complete waste of my time or something, but I don't think so. A lot of people really enjoy these and have been sharing these more than other episodes get shared. And I always appreciate it when you share episodes. I really do. And of course, when you donate to the show, plenty of ways to donate to the show. We talked earlier in the beginning of the episode, how some people are giving me Amazon gift cards, Bitcoin, BLACKCOIN, NXT, lots of options out there for you. Okay, to donate to the show. And we have the Amazon affiliate link, to go through as well. Especially if you're going to buy some of these games, please do not hesitate to use that, as it does very much help the studio that both I and the goddess of godlessness, the Duchess of debauchery, Stephanie Murphy, works in as well. So it really helps not just me, but also the producer and the studio in general out. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free, and also you can leave comments on sovereigntech.com on the actual sound. A lot of people have been leaving some very kind comments. I haven't gotten to them, but I will get to them. I will respond to you. So there it is. There's our top 8, the video games of the 90s. And really, I guess it should be called video games of the 90s that you just never heard of, or maybe that you hadn't heard of. So I've got a really bright audience. You guys, all of you guys and gals, are the best. So, Harpe Lucem. Don't worry, normal episode coming out this week, too. I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.